Thank you. Today I'd like to present to the board the benefits of text sets and using text sets in the classroom as opposed to um, relying on textbooks for the sole purpose of teaching our students literacy skills. And so really before we can talk about what text sets are and kind of why we need to move towards text sets, we need to look at, you know, textbooks and why textbooks are often not enough in the classroom. And real briefly, and we're going to go through each one of these points. Um, Textbooks are superficial. Um, at times they can be exceedingly hard to read. I know it might be some time since you've last looked at a textbook, but they can be hard to read. They don't necessarily um, grab readers' attention. At times, depending on the textbook, it can be badly designed or poorly designed. They often are authoritarian, and that's a point I'll touch on really in more depth here in a minute by what I mean by authoritarian. Really, any text, if presented in such a way by a teacher, can be authoritarian, but we'll look at that. We'll look at some inaccuracies in textbooks, and then the fact that textbooks really are written for students. So, when we look at the first reason, textbooks being superficial, um, for those of you that don't know, I taught U.S. history. And if you've seen a U.S. history textbook, they're very thick, and we add years to them almost every year. History is constantly growing as a field. These textbooks are filled with lots of facts and figures, peoples, dates, battles, etc. Um, but in all these facts, these dates, people, battles, a lot of times truly important concepts can be missed. Because we're presenting all this data, but it's at a very superficial level, and we're not going in depth in these concepts. Just to give you an example, I could have kids tell me all about the Civil War. They might tell me battles. They might tell me even that the North won. But they fail to understand the basic reason why the war started. And so that can get lost. So we're presenting information in textbooks at a superficial level, which is not necessarily beneficial to our students. Next, we look at textbooks. They are hard to read. They are poorly designed or badly designed at times. Um, you know, Textbooks, first and foremost, are designed to be reference books. And I think sometimes in the classroom, teachers have a tendency to use them um, really without that purpose in mind. Textbooks catalog large information or large amounts of information. And again, it's good to have that reference book, but it needs to be treated more like, just that. It shouldn't be something that we should send kids to read large amounts of information from, because again, most people aren't going to go sit and read an encyclopedia. Now, I did as a child, but I'm guessing a lot of people aren't going to do that. So if we're using them to try to tell a narrative in the classroom about something or get kids interested, it's not probably going to work. If we rely on textbooks to try to teach some of the literacy skills that we need to teach, we're going to be disappointed in that. Furthermore, textbooks are they are confusing and overwhelming, I guess is a way to put it. Publishers over the years have tried to adapt to students, and they've tried to make textbooks much more interesting to read. And in the course of doing that, they've actually made them much more confusing to read. They think about what textbooks are trying to compete with. They're trying to compete with video games and videos on the internet. There's just a lot of clutter in them, which again clouds students' ability to really pick out and get the important concepts and the important information that they should be getting from the text. So they can be confusing and overwhelming, along with being poorly designed. Next, textbooks can be authoritarian, and really, this could be anything here, but I think students have a tendency to think, well, it's a textbook, so it's got to be true. Um, but whenever a teacher relies on a single source for content, there is a tendency for students to view that as authoritarian. They think that they have to accept this view. Um, but again, the one view of what's presented in the textbook doesn't necessarily mean it's the right point of view. Sometimes there's mistakes, but it's important for us, especially in today's day and age, to teach students to really recognize bias, seek out their own information in textbooks, and not necessarily take everything that's in a textbook to be the one view or the one way of looking at things. So that's important, but important for texts kind of across the board. Also, with that, when you look at the textbooks, they are often inaccurate. They make mistakes, they oversimplify things. And even though there are reviewers that go over these textbooks with a fine-tooth comb, there are things that end up that are inaccurate. Furthermore, textbooks can become outdated, especially with the budget current schools are under. And we're not immune to that. We often delay purchasing textbooks, and so that means you have textbooks that are out of date or have wrong or inaccurate information in it, or just information that is now outdated. For example, I taught U.S. history for a number of years, and in government, and I've just this last semester, for example, I was teaching government, a government lesson with a textbook that had information from the 2000 election in it. Well, that doesn't mean much when it's that old. Furthermore, textbooks aren't written for students. Um, Publishing textbooks is a business. They have to create books that sell. And because publishers have to do this, they often are subject to the people trying to meet the needs of the people that have the purchasing power, or purchase large amounts of textbooks. So the needs of those people are often what textbooks are addressing rather than the students themselves, which again is kind of a situation that's not good. So and then finally, kind of along with that, with all this, textbooks cost too much, and so that leads from my last point where textbooks they're inaccurate, all these things, we delay purchasing them because they cost too much, and so we need to develop a more cost-effective way to teach our students some of these skills, and that cost-effective way is a text set. And so if we look at what a text set is, it's just a collection of related texts organized around a topic or a line of inquiry. And given what we know about the weaknesses of textbooks, text sets can be a way to organize a lot of this information. And so here's just a chart that really outlines the what a strong text set would look like versus a weak text set. And so you can see a strong text set would build student knowledge about a topic, build a meaningful connection to the anchor text. And so a lot of times text sets are organized around an anchor text. They're rich, they're worthy of study. They're a range of text types, which means you have fiction, nonfiction, you might have a poetry item, you might even have a blog, a journal, a magazine, something like that. And then also, as you're having a different types of text, you also have different complexity levels. Where weak text sets, oftentimes there's not as strong of a connection between the texts that you're selecting. Sometimes you don't have that range of text types. Sorry, that's a bit of a tongue twister. Where you're looking, a weak text set might only have one genre. or format. And then your text complexity is not as strong either. You generally don't have the 1 or 2 grade levels above or below associated with those texts. So why we want to use text sets in the classroom? Obviously, we talked about some of the weaknesses of textbooks, but really, text sets are going to address many of the problems, like I said, of textbooks. The focus of study is going to be on concepts rather than content. So that again, that goes back to my point about students in the Civil War. We're going to focus more on those concepts and less on those minute facts, or at least connect those facts together under a broad concept. Which leads to my next point here. Students can gain a broad perspective and in-depth understanding of the subject matter at the same time, because it helps link those things together. And text sets also are going to encourage students to activate their background knowledge. What do they already know about something? And then kind of get them to do some of their own investigatory learning, and then have some student choice in what's learning there as well. So text sets are going to allow teachers to use a variety of materials to help students progress through the Iowa Core. And if you look at the Iowa Core, it's a logical progression, and text sets are going to allow teachers to move students through that logical progression of skills and abilities. Textbooks lack the ability to cohesively move students through this progression, and text sets better allow teachers to do that. So if we look at, just for example, a 3rd grade science classroom doing a unit on weather and climate. So if we look at the Next Generation Standard on weather and climate of obtain and combine information to describe climates in different regions of the world, we can then formulate a text set around that concept and around that idea, rather than just learning from a textbook about it. It's going to involve a much more rich and better understanding of it altogether. So if you want some more information, here are some sites you can go to learn more about text sets.